he laughed. It wasn't a warm, collegial sound. It was a wheezing, dismissive puff of air that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the cavernous, minimalist office he didn't design. And away. I stood there, on the cold, polished concrete floor that I had personally selected, under the precisely angled gallery lighting that I had spec'd, and felt the heat rise in my neck. For 7 years my name was Calla, and I was the ghost in the machine at Gus Collier's celebrated architecture firm. He was the visionary, the face on the magazine covers, the silver-haired maestro of urban form. But the award-winning designs, the ones that made critics weep and developers write blank checks, they came from my private sketchbooks, my moleskines, filled with frantic, late-night inspiration, which he called my doodles. If you've ever poured your soul into something, only to watch someone else take a bow, then you know what the next part of this story feels like. And if you're here, I have a feeling you do. It helps to know I'm not just screaming this into the void. So if any of this resonates, let me know in the comments below. It means a lot to know I'm not alone in this. The meeting had been my idea, a foolish, optimistic miscalculation. I had just solved the intractable engineering problem on the Zurich Tower project, a solution that involved a novel cantilevered truss system I'd sketched on a napkin during a sleepless night. It saved the client $8 million and preserved the integrity of a design Gus had nearly compromised with a clumsy, brute force approach. He had presented my solution to the client as his own epiphany, of course. He'd even reenacted my sleepless night, telling them he woke up in a cold sweat with the answer fully formed in his mind. I stood in the back of the room, next to the coffee machine, and smiled until my jaw ached. That was the moment I decided, no more. So I scheduled the meeting. I walked into his office, the one with the view of the Helios Tower, my first masterpiece, his biggest award, and I laid it all out. I didn't talk about the past. I talked about the future. I talked about my contributions, my project leadership, my value to the firm, and then I asked for what I had earned, 1,000 times over, a junior partnership, my name on the letterhead, credit. He leaned back in his Eames chair, a throne of leather and steel I had helped him pick out, and he looked at me with a kind of paternalistic pity. He said, "Calla, you're a phenomenal draftsman, truly, one of the best I've ever seen. But a partner? A partner has to network, they have to schmooze, they have to have the vision." He gestured vaguely at the skyline, at the monuments to my vision. "You're a technician, a brilliant one. You make the gears turn. I steer the ship." Then came the laugh, the final, soul-crushing punctuation mark. He said, "You should be grateful for the job, Calla. You get to work on the best projects in the world. What more could you want?" My heart didn't break. It didn't plummet. It went cold. It was a strange, clarifying calm, the kind you feel in the eye of a hurricane. All the noise, all the years of self-doubt and swallowed anger, it all just stopped. I saw him not as a mentor or a boss, but as a parasite, an elegant, well-dressed parasite who had been feeding on my work for 7 years. I looked at him, my face a perfect, serene mask. I learned long ago that in his world, emotion was weakness, so I gave him none. I just nodded. I said, "Thank you for clarifying, Gus. I understand my position here perfectly now." I turned and walked to the door. He called after me, his voice laced with smug satisfaction. "Glad we had this chat, Calla. Now, about that facade detail on the Kyoto project." I paused with my hand on the cool stainless steel door handle I had specified. I didn't turn around. I just said, "I resign," effective immediately, and then I walked out and didn't look back. I resigned and took my doodles to his biggest rival. They didn't see a draftsman. They saw the mind behind the Collier empire. Now, we're building a landmark tower right across the skyline from his signature building, and my name is on the cornerstone. This is the story of how I stopped being a ghost and started building my own monuments. The walk from his office to my desk was the longest 10 yards of my life. It was a silent parade past my own achievements. The scale model of the Argent Tower, with its impossible, twisting exoskeleton, I'd solved that on a weekend, fueled by stale coffee and the stubborn refusal to accept that it couldn't be done. The framed photo of the ribbon cutting for the Shanghai Museum, its flowing organic lines born from a sketch I'd made of a seashell on a beach. Gus was front and center, beaming, his arm around the mayor. I was in the office, 7,000 miles away, already fixing a flaw in his next vision. Each step was a quiet indictment. My colleagues, heads down, sensed the seismic shift. They were good people, mostly, talented architects and engineers trapped in the same gravitational pull of Gus's ego. They all knew who did the real work. But knowing and acting are two different worlds, separated by mortgages and student loans, and the fear of a bad reference from a titan of the industry. I didn't blame them for their silence. I had been silent for 7 years. I reached my workstation, a small island of order in the open-plan chaos. It wasn't an office. It was a desk. House believed in a flat hierarchy for everyone but himself. I didn't pack a box. There was nothing to pack. The plants were the firms. The computer was the firms. The photos of my family were digital, on my phone. The only thing in that entire building that was truly mine were the ideas in my head and the sketchbooks in my bag. I picked up my bag, which contained 2 moleskin notebooks and my personal laptop. I slid my keycard across the desk, a small plastic rectangle that held the keys to a kingdom I had built but could never rule. Then I walked towards the elevator, my back straight, my footsteps even. I could feel his eyes on me, watching from his glass-walled cage. He was probably expecting me to break, to turn back, to crumble. He had underestimated me for the last time. The elevator doors closed, and my reflection stared back at me, a pale, composed woman in a simple black dress. I looked calm. I looked professional, but inside, a dam was breaking. The doors opened onto the lobby, and the sound of the city rushed in. I walked out into the afternoon sun, put on my sunglasses, and only when I was a block away, lost in the anonymous crowd, did the shaking start. My hands trembled, my breath hitched. It wasn't a breakdown, not yet. It was a system reboot. The ghost was being exorcised from the machine. I didn't go home. I couldn't. My apartment, a small, carefully curated space that I loved, would feel like a cage. It was filled with books on architecture, with prints of great buildings. It was a shrine to a dream I had just been told was not for me. So I went to the one place that felt like neutral ground, a place of pure function, the public library. I found a quiet carrel in the back, surrounded by the smell of old paper and silence. And there, I finally let it all out. No tears. I was past tears. It was a quiet, internal collapse, a hollowing out. 7 years, a third of my professional life. I thought back to the beginning, the bright-eyed graduate, fresh out of Columbia, recruited by Gus Collier himself. He had been so charming, so effusive in his praise of my thesis project. He called it brave and transformative. He talked about mentorship, about legacy. He said, "With me, Kala, you won't just be designing buildings, you'll be reshaping the world." It was intoxicating. I believed him. The first year was a blur of excitement. I was given real responsibility, real problems to solve. I'd stay late, fueled by a genuine passion for the work, and slide my sketches under his door. The next morning, he'd call a team meeting and present my ideas, slightly tweaked, as his own. "Something I was mulling over last night," he'd say. At first, it felt collaborative. We were a team. His success was my success. The firm's name was on the building, and my fingerprints were all over the blueprints. For a while, that was enough. The first crack appeared about 2 years in. It was a competition for a new cultural center in Copenhagen. The brief was complex, requiring a blend of historical sensitivity and modern sustainability. I worked on it for a month, almost exclusively. I developed a concept based on the interlocking wings of a dragonfly, a biomimetic design that was both beautiful and incredibly energy efficient. I built the model myself, in the office, over a long weekend. It was my baby. We won. The day the news came in, Gus took the entire senior staff, the partners who had barely touched the project, out for $1,000 a bottle champagne lunch. I was told to hold down the fort and answer the phones. I sat at my desk, eating a sad desk salad, and read the press release online. It quoted Gus extensively. The dragonfly concept came to me in a flash of inspiration. While walking through the Tivoli Gardens, it read. He had never even been to Tivoli Gardens. That was from my research notes. He had stolen not just my design, but my process, my story. That was the day I started keeping a second set of sketchbooks, the ones that never saw the inside of the office. It wasn't a plan, it was a reflex, a desperate act of self-preservation, my soul on paper, under lock and key. This memory led to another. Arthur. Arthur Pym was the firm's head draftsman, a relic from a bygone era of graphite and vellum. He was in his late 60s, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that saw everything. He had been with the firm before Gus had become a visionary. He'd seen it all. About a year after the Copenhagen incident, he found me late one night, hunched over my desk, refining a detail on what would become the Helios Tower. He stood beside me for a long moment, just watching. Then he said, quietly, you know, his first big project, the one that made his name, the old Miller building downtown. That was Frank Lloyd Wright's intern's design. Gus was the intern. Some things don't change. He just got better at hiding the source code. Be careful, Calla. He's not just building his legacy on your work. He's building it on your silence. I had brushed it off, nervously. I'd said, we're a team, Arthur. He just gave me a sad smile and shuffled away. His words had been a warning, a seed of doubt, planted in the fertile ground of my growing unease. I had ignored it. I had to believe in the dream. I had to believe my loyalty would eventually be rewarded. To admit Arthur was right was to admit I had made a terrible mistake, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Why did I stay? That's the question, isn't it? The one people ask. Why endure it for so long? The answer is messy. It wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 little things. It was the golden handcuffs of a steady, generous paycheck that helped me pay for my mother's long-term care facility. It was the genuine love for the work itself, the pure, unadulterated joy of solving a complex structural puzzle, even if someone else took the credit. It was the sunk cost fallacy. I've already invested 5 years, 6 years. If I leave now, it was all for nothing. If I just hold on a little longer, he'll have to recognize me. He'll have to. And there was the loyalty, a misplaced, toxic loyalty, but a powerful one. Gus was a master manipulator. He would follow a public humiliation with a private word of praise. After he stole my Copenhagen design, he gave me a surprise bonus, calling me the unsung hero of the firm in a one-on-one meeting. He made me feel complicit in my own erasure, as if we had a secret, special understanding. You and me, Calla, we know who the real talent is. That's all that matters. He made my silence feel like a position of power, the quiet confidant of the king, rather than what it was, the quiet servant. Sitting in that library, Carol, the full weight of that manipulation crashed down on me. I saw the pattern, the cycle of abuse, as clearly as a blueprint. The stolen idea, the public credit-taking, the private pacification, the reset, and I had let it happen. For 7 years, the shame of it was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I wasn't just a victim, I had been a volunteer. I put my head in my hands. The hum of the library's fluorescent lights felt deafening. This was it, the low point, the moment of despair, where you realize the hole you're in is one you helped dig. I had no job. My entire portfolio, my life's work for the past 7 years, was legally and publicly his. I had a non-compete clause that, if he chose to enforce it, would prevent me from working in architecture in the state for 2 years. A debatable clause, my lawyer friend once told me over drinks, but a costly one to fight. I was a ghost with a non-compete. The irony was suffocating. I pulled out my phone, my fingers numb. I scrolled through my contacts, not knowing who to call. My mom? No. I couldn't worry her. A friend? What could I even say? I was fired. I quit. I had a public-private meltdown. My thumb hovered over Arthur's name. He would understand. But a call from me now could put his own job in jeopardy. Gus was vengeful. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. An email. The subject line was just one word. Helios. My blood ran cold. I thought it was from Gus. A follow-up. A legal threat. My finger trembled as I opened it. The sender wasn't Gus Collier. It was a name I knew well. A name that commanded more respect in the architectural world than Gus ever could. Eleanor Vance, founder and principal of Vance Architecture, Gus's biggest and most respected rival. The body of the email was short. 5 sentences that changed my life. Miss Reyes, I was on the Pritzker jury for the Helios Tower a few years back. There was a lot of debate. I know a Collier design when I see one. That wasn't it. I've been waiting for you to get tired of being a ghost. Call me when you're ready. And then her personal cell phone number. I read it once, twice, a third time. The words on the screen seemed to glow. Someone had seen. Someone at the highest level had looked at my work, my soul rendered in steel and glass, and had seen me. The real me, not the draftsman, not the technician, the architect. The despair didn't just evaporate, it transmuted, it hardened. The quiet internal collapse became a silent internal compression. The heat of my shame and anger was being forged into something cold, hard, and sharp, like a diamond. I stood up from the library carrel. The shaking had stopped. My hands were steady. My breath was even. The reboot was complete. I walked out of the library back into the city sunlight. I looked up at the forest of skyscrapers, at the monuments to ego and capital, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like a contender. I took a deep breath. I pulled out my phone, went to my contacts, and pressed call. It wasn't about revenge. I told myself that then, and I tell myself that now. It was about correction, a market correction for stolen value, a structural correction for a flawed foundation. I had spent 7 years building Gus Collier's empire. Now it was time to build my own. The meeting with Eleanor Vance wasn't an interview. It was a summit. Her office was everything Gus's wasn't. It was warm, filled with books and plants, and comfortable, worn-in furniture. It smelled of coffee and old paper. It was a workshop, not a showroom. Eleanor herself was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She pointed to a chair and said, "So, show me the doodles." She used the word with a wry, knowing smile. It wasn't an insult. It was an invitation, a shared secret. It was the password that opened the door to my future. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling I hadn't had in years. This wasn't the fear of a subordinate. It was the thrill of an equal. I unzipped my bag and took out the 2 Moleskine notebooks, the real ones, the ones Gus had never seen. I placed them on the solid oak table between us. For a moment I hesitated. These weren't just drawings. They were my unfiltered thoughts, my wildest ideas, my professional soul. They were intensely personal. Handing them over felt like shedding a skin, but one look at Eleanor's patient, expectant face told me it was safe. This wasn't Gus, looking for something to steal. This was a master artisan, looking to recognize the work of another. I opened the first book, and it wasn't about revenge. It was about proving a thesis. My thesis was that Gus Collier hadn't just stolen a few designs, he had stolen a philosophy, an entire architectural language that I had been developing since college. My sketchbooks weren't a random collection of cool-looking buildings, they were a unified body of work, a manifesto on paper. I had explored concepts Gus had never even heard of: parametricism linked to real-time environmental data, buildings with kinetic facades that responded to the sun and wind, urban planning that integrated vertical farming and water recycling, not as afterthoughts, but as core circulatory systems. As I turned the pages, I narrated my thinking. I explained the mathematical principles behind the organic forms, the sustainable material science I had been researching in my spare time, the way the transit hubs I designed were meant to foster community, not just movement. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes scanning every line, every annotation. She would occasionally point to a detail, a specific joint, a particular curve, and nod, a small appreciative sound in her throat. She saw the connections. She saw the consistent hand. She saw the single, coherent vision that linked a small residential concept on one page to a massive city-spanning arcology on the next. After I finished the first book, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final verdict. She said, "Gus didn't just steal your designs, Kala. He stole your voice. He's been speaking a language he doesn't understand for 7 years. It's a wonder the whole thing hasn't collapsed into gibberish." She then opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a set of blueprints. She unrolled them on the table. It was a site plan for a prime piece of real estate in the city's new development district, a corner lot, a prestigious address. I knew the plot well. Every architect in the city was drooling over it. It sat directly across the river from the Helios Tower. Eleanor tapped a finger on the empty space on the blueprint. She said, "The city wants a landmark, something iconic, forward-thinking, and sustainable. They want the future." For the last 6 months, every big firm has thrown their hat in the ring, including Collier. His proposal is predictable, another glass box, but with slightly curvier edges. It's a tired echo of your work. They aren't impressed. The competition is still open. She looked at me, her eyes boring into mine. I have the capital. I have the political connections. I have the engineering team. What I don't have is a vision for this site that feels truly new. Until now. She pushed the second unopened sketchbook towards me. She said, "I have a feeling the answer is in there. I'm not offering you a job, Kala. Senior architects are a dime a dozen. I'm offering you a partnership. My name is already on the door. There's room for another, Vance Kala Architecture. We can announce it tomorrow. But first, you have to show me what we're going to build." My hand was shaking as I opened the second sketchbook. I knew exactly which page I was looking for. It was a design I had worked on 2 years ago, on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It was born from a moment of pure frustration with the soulless, corporate-approved modernism Gus favored. I had wanted to design something that felt alive, that seemed to defy gravity. A tower that didn't just scrape the sky, but danced with it. It was a slender, twisting structure composed of 3 interlocking ribbons, tapering as they rose, culminating in a spire that housed a series of wind turbines, making the building a net power generator. I had called it the Meridian. I had made the mistake of showing the initial concept sketch to Gus. He had glanced at it for less than a second before scoffing. He said, "It's pointlessly complex, Kala. The engineering is a nightmare, and the budget would be astronomical. It's an art project, not a building. Stick to the practical stuff. That's what you're good at." He had dismissed it. He had called it impractical, and so I knew it was brilliant. I turned to the page and slid the book across the table. Eleanor stared at the drawing for a full minute. Silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. She looked up from the book, then out her window, in the direction of the Helios Tower. She said, "He's going to have to look at this every single morning when he gets to his office. It's not just a building, Kala. It's a statement. It's a paradigm shift. It's checkmate." Before we could even draft the partnership agreement, I knew there was one more piece of the puzzle I needed to put in place. My foresight. My secret insurance policy. I told Eleanor, "Wait." I opened my personal laptop, the one that had never been connected to the Collier network. I entered a password and pulled up a series of encrypted folders. Inside were 7 years of my life. Every digital sketch, every CAD file, every email chain where I had proposed a solution that Gus later claimed as his own. And crucially, every file had its original untampered metadata. Creation dates, last modified dates, all time-stamped, all predating Gus's public announcements. This was the part that was legal gay. I had created many of these on my own time, on my own machine, but the ideas often pertained to firm projects. A savvy corporate lawyer could argue it was all work for hire. But my own quiet legal consultation a year prior had given me a sliver of hope. My lawyer had called it the off-duty genius clause, a long-shot argument that concepts developed outside of work hours, and not as a direct, assigned task, could be considered personal intellectual property. It was a weak shield, but a shield nonetheless. Its real power wasn't in a courtroom. It was in the threat of discovery, the threat of showing the world the Emperor's true tailor. Eleanor looked at the trove of data, haze wide. My God, Kala, this isn't a shield, it's a nuke. We won't need to use it. We just need him to know we have it. The final piece was the human element. Ene. My friend. And I called Arthur Pym. I didn't offer him a job. I didn't try to poach him. That wasn't my style. I just told him what had happened. I told him about Eleanor, about the partnership, about the Meridian. I told him I was finally building my own house. I finished by saying, I just wanted you to hear it from me first. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard the sound of a desk drawer opening. Arthur's voice came back, thick with emotion. He said, Kala, I'm holding my retirement papers. I filled them out last year. I just never had a good enough reason to file them. You're a good enough reason. He paused, and I heard him scribbling something. He said, just tell me where to send my resume. I may be an old man, but I still know how to draw a straight line, and I want to draw them for you. My first employee. A man with 50 years of experience, a walking library of architectural knowledge, and a loyalty that money could never buy. The foundation of my new firm was set. It was built on talent, foresight, and trust. Everything Collier Architects had lost. The next morning the announcement went live. A full-page feature in the industry's most respected journal. Eleanor Vance forms new partnership with rising star Kala Reyes. It was a masterstroke of positioning by Eleanor. I wasn't a former Collier architect. I was a rising star, as if I had appeared out of nowhere. The article was accompanied by a single stunning photorealistic rendering of the Meridian. My design. My name was underneath it. Lead architect. The shockwave hit Gus Collier's office at 9:05 a.m., and I didn't have to be there to see it. I had a front row seat. From my new temporary desk at Vance Kala, I could see my own past, and I had an insider, a field agent, who would narrate the collapse for me. The first text from Arthur came at 9:15 a.m. It just said, it's on every screen. The whole floor is silent. The announcement of Vance Kala architecture and the unveiling of the Meridian wasn't a shot across the bow. It was a torpedo amidships. We knew it would cause a stir, but even I underestimated the speed and ferocity of the impact. The architecture world is small and insular. Reputations are everything, and the currency of that world isn't just money, it's innovation. For 7 years Gus Collier had been trading on my innovation. We had just cut off his supply line, and revealed to the entire market that his vaults were empty. Arthur's texts became a running commentary, a real-time log of a collapsing empire. 9:30 a.m. Gus just walked the floor. Big fake smile, said healthy competition is good for everyone. Nobody is buying it. He looks like he's aged 10 years. 10 a.m. He's in the big conference room with the partners. The one with the glass walls. He's yelling. We can't hear him, but we can see him. He's jabbing his finger at a projection of the Meridian. 10:45 a.m. The partners are leaving the meeting. They look like they've seen a ghost. Your ghost, I think. Gus's first reaction was predictable, denial and dismissal. He sent out a firm-wide memo. In it he wished me well in my new role as a junior designer, and chalked up the Meridian to a lucky sketch, a flash in the pan. He emphasized that the real rigorous work of architecture was done at his firm, and that our untested venture was a risk no serious client would take. The memo was meant to project strength and reassure his staff. Arthur told me it had the opposite effect. The condescension was so transparent, so patently false in the face of the stunning design everyone had seen, that it shattered whatever remaining credibility he had with his own people. The best of his young architects, the ones who, like me, had been doing the heavy lifting, started quietly updating their online portfolios that same day. The first direct hit came not from us, but from a client. a big one. Sterling Global, a development conglomerate for whom I had personally overseen 3 major projects. They were in the final stages of a multi-$100 million deal with Collier for a new headquarters in London. I had developed the initial concept, a beautiful terraced building that integrated green space in a way the firm had never done before. Gus, of course, had presented it as his own. At 11:30 a.m., I received an email. It was from Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Sterling. The email was addressed to me, at my new vance-kala.com address. Gus was CC'd. It was a work of corporate art. Kala, it began. Congratulations on the new partnership and the truly breathtaking vision for the Meridian. We were, of course, under the impression that the design philosophy we so admired in the London proposal was proprietary to Collier Architects. Seeing your new work, it is now clear to us where the source of that philosophy truly resides. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders to work with the best and most innovative minds in the field. Consequently, we are placing the London project on hold, effective immediately, pending a re-evaluation of our architectural partner. We would be very interested to hear your thoughts on the project when you have a moment. It was a kill shot, delivered with a polite smile. It wasn't an accusation of theft. It was a simple, logical business decision. They were following the talent, and by CCing Gus, they were making it brutally, publicly clear why. Arthur's text at 11:37 a.m. His assistant just ran out of his office crying. I think he threw something, not at her, just at the wall. Gus went into a frenzy. He tried to call Marcus Thorne. No answer. He tried to call me. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was a rambling, incoherent mix of threats and pleading. And he talked about non-compete clauses and intellectual property theft in one breath. And in the next, he talked about how he had made me and how I owed him my loyalty. It was the sound of a man who had lost control of the narrative for the first time in his life. He was used to being the one who steered the ship. Now he was just noise, lost in the storm I had created. I didn't reply. Eleanor and I had a strategy. Silence. His panic, his threats, his bluster. It was all noise. Our response was the quiet, methodical work of building a better firm. While he was yelling into voicemails, we were refining the engineering specs for the Meridian. While he was having his lawyers draft threatening letters, we were taking calls from his best clients. The Sterling Global email was just the first crack in the dam. Over the next 48 hours, 2 more major clients called us. They didn't even bother to put their Collier projects on hold. They canceled them outright. One, a hotelier from Dubai, was refreshingly blunt. He called my new office line directly. He said, "Miss Reyes, I paid Collier for a symphony, and I have just discovered he is merely the conductor. The composer has left the orchestra. I would like to hire the composer." It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about clarity. The market was simply clarifying who held the actual value. For years, the value had been attributed to the brand, to the name Gus Collier. Now, the market was correcting its error. The value was in the vision, the talent, the work. The value was me. By the end of the week, the silent takeover was becoming a rout. Arthur reported that the atmosphere at Collier Architects was funereal. The energy was gone. The best project manager had given her notice. 2 of the brightest young CAD specialists had sent their resumes to our HR department, which at that point was just Eleanor's long-suffering assistant, who was now buried under an avalanche of applications. We weren't poaching anyone. We were a lighthouse, and Gus's employees were sailors on a sinking ship, swimming for their lives. Gus's next move was exactly what my lawyer had predicted. The formal, terrifying-looking letter from a high-priced law firm, a cease and desist. It accused me of stealing trade secrets, of violating my non-compete, of intellectual property theft. It demanded we halt all work on the Meridian and retract our partnership announcement. It threatened damages in the tens of millions of dollars. When the courier delivered it, Eleanor didn't even flinch. She just slid it across the desk to me and said, "Your turn." I didn't even need to call our lawyer. The response package was already prepared. We had assembled it on day 1. It contained 3 things. First, a single representative sample of my work, the initial hand-drawn sketch of the Helios Tower from my private notebook. dated 2 years before the project was even announced. Second, the digital file of that same sketch, with its unalterable metadata, clearly showing a creation date on my personal machine, on a Sunday afternoon. Third, a sworn affidavit from Arthur Pym, attesting that he had personally witnessed me developing the core concepts for the Helios, Copenhagen, and Shanghai projects, often after hours and without direct assignment from Mr. Collier. Our lawyer sent the package to Gus's legal team with a simple cover letter. It said, "We believe you will find the enclosed materials dispositive. Any legal action you pursue will involve a discovery process that will bring these, and hundreds of similar documents, into the public record. We are confident in our position. Govern yourselves accordingly." It was a polite legal way of saying, "Go ahead, make my day." The lawsuit never materialized. The threat vanished into thin air. We had shown him the nuke, and he had wisely chosen not to press the button. His last weapon was gone. All he had left was his voice. So he called me again. This time his tone was completely different. No anger, no threats, just a desperate, almost pathetic attempt at conciliation. He sounded like a different person, a smaller person. The exodus was quiet but swift. It wasn't a dramatic walkout. It was a slow, steady bleed. First, the clients, then the talent. Sterling Global officially signed with Vance Kala a week after their initial email. The London project was back on, but bigger, better. I scrapped the old design, which had been compromised by Gus's commercial instincts, and redrew it from scratch over a weekend. The new concept was bolder, more integrated, purer. When I presented it to Marcus Thorne, he simply said, "That's the building I always knew you wanted to design." The Dubai hotelier followed, signing a contract for a 70-story resort that would incorporate the kinetic facade I had sketched years ago. A project Gus had deemed an impossible fantasy. We were making it possible. Our client list was starting to look like a curated collection of Gus's greatest hits, except they were now our future blockbusters. Arthur gave me the daily report from the front lines. The Collier firm was hemorrhaging. They had lost nearly 40% of their projected decade-long revenue in under a month. More importantly, they had lost the narrative. The industry press, which had once fawned over Gus, was now writing speculative pieces about the Vance Kala phenomenon and the paradigm shift in the industry. They started referring to Gus's signature style as late-period Collier, implicitly acknowledging that a new period, defined by someone else, had begun. The final, desperate countermove from Gus was the one that I had, on some level, been expecting since the day I walked out. It was the call I took in my new office, a corner space with a perfect, unobstructed view of the Helios Tower. He didn't bluster or threaten. He tried to sound like the old Gus, the charming mentor. "Kala," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I've had some time to think. I may have been hasty. You were right. You've earned a bigger role. The partnership offer is on the table, a full partnership. Your name on the door. Collier Rays. We'll tell the world this was the plan all along, that your move to Vance was a temporary strategic alliance. We can spin this. We can win." I listened, silently, as he laid out the offer: a massive salary, a percentage of the firm, a leadership role, everything I had asked for, and more, everything I had earned 7 years ago. He was offering me the keys to the kingdom he had locked me out of. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I could hear his strained breathing on the other end of the line. He was waiting for my answer, for his absolution. I swiveled in my chair and looked at the Helios Tower, my beautiful stolen child, gleaming in the morning light. It looked smaller somehow. I finally spoke, my voice calm and even. I said, "Gus, do you remember what you told me in our last meeting? You said I should be grateful for the job." He stammered, "Kala, I was wrong. I was under pressure." "No," I said, cutting him off gently. "You were right. I am grateful. I'm so incredibly grateful for the job you made me leave. It was the greatest opportunity you ever gave me." Then I hung up. The power shift was complete. It wasn't that I had taken his power. It was that he had never really possessed it in the first place. He had just been borrowing it, and his credit had run out. He had built his house on my foundation, and when I walked away, the whole structure was revealed to be hollow. It was just a matter of time before gravity did the rest. A week later, I agreed to meet him. It was his request, one last plea, sent through a mutual acquaintance. I said yes, not for him, but for me. I needed to close the loop, to put a final, definitive period at the end of this long chapter. I chose the venue, a small, neutral cafe, far from the gleaming towers of the financial district, a place with no architectural significance whatsoever. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table, looking rumpled and tired. The bespoke suit hung on him differently now, as if it belonged to a larger man. The aura of power, the self-assured charisma that had once filled a room, was gone. He just looked like a man who hadn't slept. He stood up, fumbling with his chair. "Kala, thank you for coming." I just nodded and sat down. I didn't order anything. He launched into a prepared speech. It was a pathetic spectacle. He apologized, but his apology was all about him. How the pressure had been immense. How he saw me as a daughter, and sometimes you're hardest on the ones you love. He was trying to reframe 7 years of calculated exploitation as a dysfunctional family drama. He slid a contract across the table. It was thick, bound in a blue folder. I didn't touch it. "This is a new offer," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Anything you want. Name your price. Name your title. Just come back. We can fix this." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the filter of awe, or fear, or resentment. I saw a man terrified of being exposed for what he was, a brilliant salesman with no product, a curator of other people's genius. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. I leaned forward slightly. I said, "Gus, do you remember what you called my sketchbooks?" He looked confused. "What? My sketchbooks?" I repeated. "The source of the Helios, the Zurich Tower, the Shanghai Museum. What was your word for them?" He paled. He remembered. I can see the memory flicker in his eyes. "You called them doodles," I said, my voice no louder than a whisper, but it cut through the cafe's chatter like a shard of glass. "You told me I was a talented draftsman who should be grateful for a job. You looked at a library of innovation and saw scribbles in a notebook." I stood up. "That's why you're going to fail, Gus. Not because I left. You're going to fail because you can't tell the difference between the doodles and the design." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I left him there with his useless contract and his hollowed-out legacy. It was the last time I ever spoke to him. 2 weeks later, a short press release appeared on a financial wire service. It announced a major leadership restructuring at Collier Architects. Citing personal health reasons, Gus Collier was stepping down as CEO and retiring from the practice of architecture, effective immediately. The firm was being absorbed by a larger, less imaginative conglomerate, its name and brand to be phased out over the next year. He wasn't just defeated, he was erased. His name, the one he had so carefully polished with my work, was being sandblasted off the wall. Arthur emailed me the link to the press release. His subject line contained a single word: gravity. The vindication wasn't a single moment. It was a series of quiet, accumulating truths. It was signing the final steel beam, to be hoisted to the top of the meridian, my signature bold and clear, next to Eleanor's. It was walking the construction site, the air thick with the smell of ozone from welding torches and wet concrete, and knowing that every line, every angle, was a direct translation of my will. It was sitting at the head of a conference table, with Arthur to my right, and a team of the brightest young architects in the city, listening to my vision, not as a ghost, but as the source. The most profound moment came on a cold, bright morning 6 months after Gus disappeared from public life. It was the groundbreaking ceremony for the Meridian. The mayor was there. The clients were there. The press was there. Eleanor spoke first, her words gracious and powerful. Then she called me to the podium. I stood there looking out at the crowd and beyond them across the river at the skyline. The Helios Tower stood proud, a monument to my past. But it was no longer a source of pain. It was a marker, a point of origin. It was the before in a before and after photograph of my own life. I didn't talk about Gus. I didn't talk about betrayal. I talked about the future. I talked about building structures that breathe, that serve the communities they stand in, that give back more than they take. I talked about the responsibility of creation. When the speeches were over, Eleanor and I walked to the ceremonial cornerstone, a block of polished black granite. A mason had carved the inscription that morning. I ran my gloved hand over the letters, feeling the crisp, deep edges. Vance Kala, the meridian. Kala Rise, lead architect. My name, carved in stone. Not hidden in the notes, not whispered in the hallways, not relegated to the fine print. It was the foundation, the beginning. From my new office, in the building that would soon stand next door, I would be able to see the Helios Tower every single day. It wouldn't be a rival. It wouldn't be a source of resentment. It would be a reminder of what happens when you let someone else hold the pen, a reminder that the most important thing an architect can ever build is their own name. For 7 years, I was a ghost. I haunted the halls of a great firm, my work visible to everyone, but my presence completely unseen. It's a strange and quiet kind of agony to be erased while you're still in the room, to pour every ounce of your talent and passion into something, only to watch someone else sign their name to your soul. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you're the ghost in your own machine, the one who fixes the presentation at midnight, who writes the code that saves the project, who comes up with the tagline that everyone loves, but who never gets the credit. You are the quiet engine in the back of the ship, while the captain stands on the bridge taking the salute. They'll tell you to be grateful for the job. They'll call your brilliance a knack, your insights doodles. They will diminish your contribution to make their own seem larger. It is the oldest trick in the Book of Power. Here is what I have learned. It is not, and was never, about revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes you. This is about correction. It's about truth. It's about reclaiming your own narrative. My story isn't about tearing Gus Collier down. It's about building Kala Reyes up. It's about the market, whether it's in business or in life, finally correcting for value. You have to be the one to issue that correction. No one will do it for you. You have to be the one to pack up your doodles, your true, untainted work, and walk out the door. You have to find the people who can see you, who don't look at your soul and see a tool they can use, but see a partner they can build with. Ghosts can't lay foundations. They can't sign contracts. They can't have their name carved into a cornerstone. You are not a ghost. You are an architect. You are just working on the wrong project. The most important project is you, and it is never too late to break ground. If this story felt real to you, if you have ever felt that sting of being overlooked or underestimated, let me know in the comments. It's important to share these stories, to know that we are not alone in these silent battles. Your story, your experience, it all matters. Please, if you found value in this, like this video. It tells the algorithm that stories of quiet strength are worth sharing. Share it with anyone you know who might need to hear that they are not invisible. And of course, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell for more stories about flipping the board and rewriting the rules. Every subscription helps this channel build its own foundation, and for that I am truly grateful. Thank you for listening.